Good evening to everyone who's joining us. We just opened the Zoom room, and so we'll wait for a few moments until everyone has come in with us, and then we'll begin tonight's program. Thank you for joining us. For those that are just coming into our Zoom room, welcome everyone. It is just 8:01. We give a couple of moments for people to get into the room. So thank you for joining us. We'll just be a couple of more moments. Once again, welcome to those that are just joining us. It's a couple of moments after 8. We're just waiting one more minute, and then we will begin tonight's program. Thank you for being with us. Hey, good evening. Thank you for joining tonight's webinar. We appreciate everyone who's on with us this evening. During these difficult times, we do find strength and comfort when we join together as a community, especially for opportunities to grow and to learn with and from one another. This is the continued purpose of Ramaz hosting these webinar programs. Before we begin the actual program, I want to continue to recognize that there are so many of us who have close family members and or close friends who have either lost someone or who have been called up to serve. We wish each and every one of our soldiers continued strength and fortitude. To the over 240 hostages who remain in captivity, we hope and pray for their safe and imminent return. To those who need a refuah shlema, we wish and pray for their full and speedy recovery. And to those who have been lost, al kiddush Hashem, may the neshamot be uplifted. At the conclusion of this evening's Zoom, we will say some Tehillim together. Before we actually start this evening's program, I want to share some important overview of what we are doing together as a community. Our students, our parents, our community members. So first and foremost, we are showing up. We're showing up for rallies in large numbers and to many, many different opportunities to rally together. We've gone to Times Square to set tables to remember the hostages. We've hung posters all over the city to make sure that our hostages are not forgotten about. We've written letters to soldiers, to displaced children and to families. We've written letters to congressmen and to governmental officials. Each morning we have a special Tehillim group with over 40 men and women each morning who say Tehillim together and gain strength from one another. We've packed thousands of items and sent them to soldiers and displaced families. We've worked together to educate all of our students. And when I recently asked a group of our Ramaz alumni what we should be doing to be helpful, here is a very, very important and passionate response that I received. Hi, Kenny. I think that some of the most important things that you can do now in the US are first and foremost calling Congress to support Israel. We hear that things are running 6-1 against us. We need that support. Second, getting a massive turnout for the November 14th rally. And I hope everyone today that's on with us will be there signing up either with Ramaz, KJ, or with any of your communal places that are sending buses. The most important support is the U.S. for Biden's policies. The more freedom that the more freedom we will have here in Israel with his support. And then he writes, since Ramaz is an academic institution, and since many have pointed out the discrepancy between support among younger and older Americans, think about how you can help Israeli hasbara and policy. People think about this and address it for the long term. We cannot afford not to reach out to major groups of American young people, U.S. Jews and Latinos, with a large, among us, U.S. and Latinos, for example, they are a large increasing minority. We need a coalition. We need building coalitions. These are the things that U.S. Jews can do to take the lead and have a positive impact on Israel, and it would be immeasurable to us. Please engage with them. Have them join with us. We need a smarter and more educated community. So as tonight's Zoom begins, I think that's the message. We need a more educated, smarter community to move forward, not just for ourselves, but to educate others. And that is why we are so privileged tonight to have with us a very distinguished Ramaz alumni, Rabbi Noah Marlowe, who is on the Harvard campus, the Hillel rabbi on the Harvard campus, and our own in-house expert, Dr. Naya Lekht, who has a vast and deep knowledge on the topic of anti-Semitism and Zionism. They will help us to frame and moderate this whole topic. And of course, we have our very own Dr. Jennifer Bernstein, who is the head of our middle school, who will be running the evening for us. And with that, I will hand it over to Jennifer Bernstein. And once again, thank you all for being on with us. Jennifer.
Thank you, Kenny. And thank you to both of this evening's speakers who are here to help us better understand and respond to the very difficult times in which we face and we find ourselves. Our first speaker, Rabbi Noah Marlowe, is a native of Stamford, Connecticut, in his second year serving as the Orthodox rabbi at Harvard Hillel and as a Harvard University chaplain. Before arriving at Hillel, Rav Noah worked as a rabbinic intern at YIOZ in Riverdale, New York, and as a Beit Midrash fellow at SAR High School. Rav Noah earned his BA in psychology, MED in Jewish education, certificate in mental health counseling and rabbinic ordination at Yeshiva University. He is an alumnus of the Ramaz Upper School and Yeshivat HaKotel. Most importantly, Rav Noah brings a listening ear, a rabbinic pun or two, and a smile to every conversation. Rav Noah, we've all been following the situation on college campuses almost as closely as what's going on in Israel. I'm going to turn the floor over to you to give us a campus update. Please tell us what is actually going on college campuses and at Harvard University.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And it's wonderful to be here with the Ramaz community, unfortunately, under these circumstances. But it's so special to be part of this community. I think that what's been going on college campuses has been something profound. There seems to be a proxy war happening on college campuses, which is a proxy for what's going on in the Middle East. And so we're seeing activism, we're seeing sometimes aggression or violence, which is being channeled toward college students, toward the college environment. And I think we've had certain stages of the unfolding events. We had the immediate aftermath of the October 7th massacre, in which we were running to grieve and to prepare vigils, memorial programs, and to lobby the administration. And there were statements coming out from Hillel, from the university, from other places. And there was, it was a confusing time where people were trying to figure out what do we do, which was followed, I think, by the second stage of activism, where student groups, the university, professors were all trying to figure out what do we do how do we do our part in this parallel kind of proxy war that's going on campus. And so there were protests both from Hillel and Chabad and pro-Israel communities, and as well as from the Palestinian community, the Palestine Solidarity Committee, which is the pro-Palestinian community at Harvard. And so that's really where we saw a lot of activism, and the tensions were beginning to really develop, and things became more heated and more emotional. That was really stage 2, which I think we're kind of behind. And now we're, I think, in stage 3, which is students trying to be students trying to get back to life, which I think is a challenge that we're all going through, both in the United States and also in Israel, and trying to figure out how, it's now been a month, how do we transition from being in crisis mode to recognizing that there's a crisis going on, but also trying to maintain a sense of normalcy during this challenging time. And so I think what's going on right now on campus, really on all levels, is a desire to refocus, to recalibrate, to reorient toward being students, to regular life on campus. I think it's very challenging to do that, and I think it's almost impossible for that to happen. And I think the reason is because there's a story being told in the media, and there's a story that journalists are able to share, and there's a kind of a story that requires seeing what's going on, behind the stage, behind the curtains of what's going on campus. So I think we've seen many statements that are coming out, both from Harvard University, from the Palestine Solidarity Committee, and other, there are some of their parallels in other universities of faculty members either condemning the university or condemning Israel. And so we've seen this type of response, and that's public, and that makes newspaper headlines, and that is what brings New York Times journalists to Harvard and other campuses to interview students. But what we don't see, I think, is the social media background on campus. So Harvard specifically has a social media platform called Side Chats, which is exclusive to Harvard College students. And it's an anonymous social media platform, and students can write whatever they want. And so at the beginning, in the beginning stage, right after October 7th, students were writing vile, toxic, vitriolic statements and comments about Jews in Israel and Zionism. And we've seen a lot of that calm down. But imagine for a moment that you're a college student and you see that you have dozens of classmates that are affirming that the murder and massacre of Jews is acceptable and legitimate. It's incredibly frightening and scary to go into class the next day with anonymous classmates. You don't know who wrote these statements or who agrees with these sentiments, who might be around you. You have no idea. It's the person who's sitting next to me. Are they a friend? Are they a foe? Are they somebody who condemned Israel? If they justified the murder of Jews 5,000 miles away, would they justify the murder of me? Would they justify violence committed against me? And so there's a certain anxiety and fright that came with that type of anonymous social media platforms. That's one part of it. The other part of it is that there are social media platforms like WhatsApp, which are normal for university students to use. And students, whether it's in their cohorts, social groups, part of their department at the university, are trying to communicate about regular happenings in their university and their academic program. And at the same time, they're being flooded with anti-Israel, sometimes anti-Semitic comments and statements, and they are experiencing harassment to a certain degree in these social media channels and groups, and they don't really have an option to opt out of them because they need them in order to be a student, to do what they need to do. But instead, they're stuck, and many students have tried to stop or to limit or to ask other students to change the topic of conversation. but it's rather difficult, and they've been unsuccessful. So I think what we see kind of manifestly, explicitly on campus is the university or universities that are trying to address specific incidents that occur on campus, whether that's, at Cooper Union, students being locked and barricaded in the library, or at Penn or Cornell, where there have been threats of violence. You see, top-down responses from the university in response to these things. And the university has more channels and opportunities and avenues for addressing those types of explicit behaviors, but less so when you have unofficial channels in which the university does not have control, which I think leads me to the next thing that we're seeing, which is that there are a lot of gray activities going on campus when it comes to protesting, for example, in which students, often not Jewish students or Israeli students or pro-Israel students are capitalizing on policies in the university's code of conduct or communal norms, which are gray inherently. And so they are doing things which aren't necessarily against the rules, aren't gross or violations at all, but the university doesn't want to take action until there's an actual violation. So we have Jewish students who are telling the university there are students or student groups that aren't violating any rules, but they've said things, anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist things, that make it seem that they harbor dangerous views against Jews. And we would like for you to not allow them to have this platform or this space. And the university puts their hands back and says, there hasn't been an actual violation or an actual incident, so we're going to wait to address it. And so what we also have is the university trying to cover its own backtrack and not really get involved until something happens. So I think as a result of that, students are also both frustrated and angry and sometimes even afraid when they have when they know that the university is only going to act once something has happened. So I think this is kind of what's going on campus. That I think the emotions around campus have changed and lessened over the last week or so. I think as students are transitioning back to school and students in academic mode, there's there are less protests going on campus, but there's still a sense that students feel that the university is not listening to them. They feel unsure who to trust, who is a friend or a classmate that it will be loyal, who will be supportive of them. There are students who have shared that they have friends that they are no longer friends with because they have shared views and ideologies that these students had no idea about, that are in opposition to their identities as Jews and Zionists, and they've had to end friendships as a result. So I think what we're seeing on campus is, I would say, less a threat of immediate danger. There's no threat to immediate safety, but there is a challenge to sense of identity, both as a Jew and as a Zionist, and also as a belonging member of the community, as somebody who the community looks out for and watches and takes care of.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and insights. We already have some questions, but we're going to hold them till after Dr. Lekht has a chance to speak, and then we'll roll out those questions. Our next speaker, Dr. Naya Lekht, was born in the former Soviet Union and emigrated to the United States with her family in 1989. She received her PhD in Russian literature from UCLA, where she wrote her dissertation on Holocaust literature in the Soviet Union. Dr. Lekht has taught at both the collegiate and high school level, and in addition to being a passionate educator and joining the Ramaz Upper School's English department, Dr. Lekht writes, teaches, and speaks on the history of anti-Semitism and Zionism. She's also a columnist for the Jerusalem Post, where she writes on the Jewish experience in the American diaspora. Dr. Lekht, welcome this evening.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so much for having me. I just want to echo what Kenny said at the very beginning, which is this is my first year at Ramaz, and right after October 7th, what I witnessed in the upper school was this enormous support for Am Yisrael, students every day gather to do Tehillim, write messages to soldiers, to victims. I've never seen something like this. Indeed, we're taking buses to Washington, D.C. next week, and the school is highly encouraging all staff and students to go. And so I'm just so grateful that this is such a school that really truly lives by the value of Am Yisrael and love for Israel. Rabbi, so I want to echo what you said, but I want to go a little bit deeper into how is it that we've gotten to this, what you call proxy war, what I often call the narrative warfare that many of our students, both now in high school and in college, and I believe even earlier in middle school, are facing. And with that, I just want to address the roots of anti-Zionism briefly with you all tonight. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. And something that I want to really stress tonight is what we see unfolding at Harvard, at UPenn, at Columbia, at NYU. It's not new. In fact, it's been unfolding, I believe, in the United States of America for the last 20 years, ever since 9/11 and the Second Intifada. But it actually has much more older roots, and that is the roots of the Soviet Union. The Soviets created the anti-Zionist campaign and propaganda. So I just want to show the audience today, on the left-hand side is a Soviet poster from the 1960s, and it says in Russian, genocide, genocid. And it's an Israeli soldier who is basically enacting the genocide. Behind him, the phantom of Hitler is applauding his actions. This sentiment, this equating of Israel to Nazis, of accusing the Jewish people and Israel of enacting an ethnic genocide, comes from the Soviet Union. This is a cartoon from 2021 from Turkey, where we see an IDF soldier looking at his reflection and he sees a Nazi. And so it's not something that is it's not an uncommon trope or accusation now to see in anti-Zionism, the equating of IDF or Israel to Nazis or baby killers. And for us here, at least in the New York district of 100 plus New York high schools are planning a walkout on Thursday, November 9th. In support for Palestine. They're calling it a national shutdown for Palestine. And notice, of course, the map. It's the entire map of Israel that they are doing. So this is very relevant to us, not just in the university, but as you can see on the high school level. Now, I like to always begin talking about anti-Zionism by showing this picture. This is from a May Day parade in Moscow in 1972. And you don't even have to know Russian or the Cyrillic alphabet to see that, of course, this is blatantly anti-Semitic. It's a Jewish spider, but there's a new twist to it. And the twist is what it says in Russian, which is Zionism is the weapon of imperialism. And that is what I want to really stress today is that the anti-Zionist narrative, the anti-Zionist campaign also shipped a narrative to the West and looking at the world from the lens of oppressed and oppressor, who's oppressing whom, and that is how this is being framed for students in both high schools and colleges. And so as you can see, they're trafficking in classic anti-Semitic imagery and tropes and kind of labeling, bringing in a new label, which is that Zionism is the weapon of imperialism. And of course, you know, the topology of the Jewish spider is nothing new. The Soviets basically went back to the protocols of the Elders of Zion and Nazi propaganda. This from 1971, this is called, at his favorite work, the Zionist spider. It says Zionism here, and he is a spider. So as you can see, a lot of the accusations that we think are relatively new, they're not new. They were used to malign Israel, to accuse the Jewish people, to delegitimize Israel in the Soviet Union in the late 60s and 70s. I want to really stress that in addition to this anti-Zionist narrative, anti-Zionist proliferation of anti-Semitism, came this new framework, and also created by the Soviet Union, in which the world, as I say, is divided between the oppressor and the oppressed. Now, the Soviets, in terms of their fight with the Americans in the Cold War, used the African continent, but also the Middle East as a proxy war between America and themselves. And so right here, you see, this is a poster from the late 60s, early 70s. It says, there is no place on earth for colonialism. That's what it says in Russian. There is no place for colonialism. And so we have an African man basically shoveling a colonial Western power. And this is, in terms of intersectionality, something that we think is quite new. Well, it's not quite new per se. This is a poster from 1961, and it says, this is the only way that one must answer colonialization. This is the answer to colonialization. What is it? It is the intersectionality between the African colonized and the Arab colonized, together with the Slavic people, will help to destroy colonialism. This idea that the people come together around a shared woe or shared status of victimhood has now become a major way that anti-Zionism has found its way to the intersectional conversation. And I hope we'll talk about that later on. I think that we have some questions about that as well. Take a look at these two pictures from the Soviet Union. This is from the 1970, I believe, 1971. This is a book. It says Zionism is racism. And we see that all the time. We see today people accusing Israel and Zionists of being racists. Or this book, Occupied by Israel, Palestinian Land. So what I'm trying to stress to the viewers tonight is that what we're seeing today is not new, but we must see, the thing is that Soviet Jews understood that this was anti-Semitism. We in America must come together, just as we are coming together in support of our brothers and sisters in Israel next week in Washington, D.C. We must come together and denounce anti-Zionism and proclaim it to be anti-Semitism. And here we are. Fast forward 20 years. This is recent. This is right after the horrific massacre, the pogrom, on October 7th, on October 20th, in Washington, D.C., in 2023, pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian rallies were held. Zionism is fascism. Colonizers out of D.C. And if you look very closely, even at the iconography here, you see a snake. Well, this is also from the Soviet Union. This is the Israeli python and the American beryl from 1968. This snake has Magen David's, the Jewish stars, and look at the snake right here. So you can't get any more of this uncanny likeness to the Soviet anti-Zionist propaganda. And what are we seeing? We're seeing this right now, right after the massacre. And to your point, Rabbi, that you said that the students are worried. 1,400 Jews were massacred, children, women, elderly. And people can't condemn that. They are worried. Well, if something happens to me, are they not going to condemn it either? I think the answer is here. I think a Jew walking by on campus, that's Zionism is fascism. Granted, this is not a picture from campus, but Zionism is fascism. Colonialists out of Harvard instead of out of DC will answer that question for these students. And so what is anti-Zionism today? Anti-Zionism today taps into classical anti-Semitic tropes of blood libel, of delegitimization and demonization of the Jewish state. And so that's how we got to this place of looking at the world through this lens. Now we understand, what are we saying? Resistance is justified when a people is occupied. And so initially, when October 7th happened, the first week, CNN, even, The Guardian, really rallied around the Jewish community. It was very surprising. And right now there's this terrible turn against the Jewish people. And what I'm hearing is things that such as, well, Hamas are fighters. They don't have an army. What are they supposed to do? This is their way of rising up against colonialism. I mean, again, what the Soviets basically said. resistance is justified when a people are occupied. And now we understand, and I've been saying it for many years, for 20 years now, free Palestine is an anti-Semitic call. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, is from the Jordan River to the sea. So I'm going to leave it there. I know that we're going to go into some questions about proportionality, some tough questions. I just wanted to give the audience tonight a sense of urgency in that anti-Zionism is today's I believe, most powerful form of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is viral, it's contagious, and it mutates. And its latest mutation is anti-Zionism, and we must denounce it. So I just want to say this, because I wanted to show you all that its roots are really in the Soviet Union, and we must denounce anti-Zionism as a form of anti-Semitism. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lekht. Our first question is about proportionality and whether some wars are necessary and just. What are your thoughts?
I'm really glad that that question came up. And in preparing for that question, I wanted to show the audience the following data. First of all, the question of, are wars just? You know, I speak quite often to American Jewish communities, mostly to youth, and I ask them, do you believe that there's such a thing as a just war or a necessary war? This poll is from 2004. It asked about the following wars: World War II, the Persian War Gulf, the Korean War, it was the current war in Iraq, 2004, 2003, and the Vietnam War. In 2004, 90% of the American population answered that yes, World War II was a just war. And that is at the heart of the question about proportionality, right? What Hamas did is a violation of international law. Okay, so in international law, you cannot target civilians. However, if you are responding and your military sites have civilians nearby, of course, you're going to try to minimize the civilian casualty. But the problem is that we are living in an era of complete disinformation and misinformation. The hospitals, the schools in Gaza are being used by Hamas. And we know this. They are using their own civilians. And so the question of proportionality, at the heart of that question really is the question of, are there such things as just wars? Take a look at World War II, okay? World War II in terms of civilian casualties. If you're looking just at numbers, if the way that you're looking at the world is only judging based on casualties of numbers, well, German civilian deaths were far greater than the deaths from the United Kingdom civilian in United States. So should the United Kingdom and United States have not then targeted Dresden? How about 9/11? We know that 9/11, 3,000 American civilians lost their lives. After 9/11, after 2003, when America went to war with Afghanistan, the Taliban, and Iraq, 432,000 civilians died. These are tough questions. But the thing is, Israel is answering these questions because it was forced onto them. Israel did not start October 7th. Neither did it start we can go back and back, we can go every single time. Israel did not start, but it must respond. It has a duty to protect its civilians. So that's my answer. My answer is really at the root of it, do you believe, not you here, but you here today, everyone, that there is such a thing as a just war? And if there is such a thing as a just war, the destruction of Hamas is just.
Thank you. You've spoken a lot this evening about the roots of anti-Zionism, rather. How does that knowledge help us to better combat anti-Zionism?
Well, the roots may be in the Soviet Union, but the Soviets were very clever. You see, the Soviets couldn't be overtly anti-Semitic. Remember, after the Second World War, interestingly enough, if you surveyed the globe, where did anti-Semitism surge the most? It surged in the Soviet Union, which is quite strange. But Stalin understood he couldn't be overtly anti-Semitic, so he started using euphemisms for Jews, such as rootless cosmopolitan, such as Zionist. But the Soviets trafficked in classic anti-Semitic tropes, but they just put them on Israel or Zionism. And so what if we educate ourselves on what are the classic anti-Semitic tropes? It doesn't matter if we're talking about Jews or Israel or Zionism. We have to look at these accusations and the tropes: blood libel, world domination. These are being used today in the rhetoric and discourse around anti-Zionism.
Thank you. We have another question here about universities and workplaces, and I think Dr. Lekht will start with you, but Rav Noah, please feel free to chime in as well. What do we do with statements from universities or workplaces that express sympathy for both sides or supporting a ceasefire?
It's a great question. So I just spoke to a big community in Milwaukee, American Jewish community, and a gentleman had asked me that question, that what does he do as a Jew? He got a letter from his workplace that calls on both sides to agree to a ceasefire. And there are hostages right now in Gaza. To force Israel to cease fire while there are civilians in Gaza being held as hostage, I've never heard of such a thing. But here's the thing that I'd like to ask, and this is what I told the gentleman in Milwaukee. Universities, schools, corporations, businesses that either take both sides or only express solidarity with the Gazans, I would go to that employer, I would go to that university, I would go to that business and ask them, you stood up for Ukraine in the conflict. You stood up during BLM for against police brutality. What is stopping you? Truthfully, what is stopping you from standing in solidarity with Jewish victims? Why are Jewish victims less than Ukrainian victims? African-American victims? Why can't you stand up for the Jewish people? That's what I would ask.
Rav Noah, is there anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah, I think there are two dimensions to this. One is the tactical dimension, which is what is the approach and strategy as a, to respond to statements that are put out, whether by a university or by an employer. I can tell you from my experience here that statements are very challenging, because as the situation evolves, there's a demand for more statements. So the more statements that you write, the more statements that you continue to need to produce. And statements are hard to craft or difficult to craft sometimes. And we're seeing this with universities as well, that in trying to account for all constituents, they are hedging their bets in the way that they make sure to address Israel and Gaza. They make sure that everyone feels seen. At UMass Amherst, recently there was a terrible incident with the students, and the university wrote a statement saying that we condemn anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, etc. And the fact that the university had to add Islamophobia in the statement that was directly a response to a Jewish student being discriminated against and to a unique anti-Semitic event is a problem that the universities and other entities and institutions are trying to address both sides. So I think that's one question of what's the tactical response? Are we going to be, is there something productive that will come out of responding, whether that's approaching an employer or that's approaching the university or university administrator? Then I think there's a second part, which is unpacking what these statements say. I think there's saying that we mourn the loss of lives on Israel and the Palestinian side, I think is something that we all agree with, and is something that's terrible and tragic. But then once you get to the nuance and complexity of saying, well, we think there should be a ceasefire, so then that leads to more open questions of what's the alternative, what's the implication of a ceasefire? And then when you ask deeper questions and follow-up questions, when you ask, well, what should happen after a ceasefire? And if the response is, well, then Israel should stop occupying Gaza, the Palestinians, you know that this conversation and dialogue will not be productive in any way, because you're having a conversation with somebody who isn't actually requesting or demanding a ceasefire, but is actually requesting both Israel to vacate the land of Israel and for Jews to leave, or God forbid, something much worse for the Jewish people. So I think that's the other question that's important to ask, which is what actually is the statement conveying, and is it even worth it to have a conversation around the statement?
Thank you. Dr. Lekht, what do students say, or perhaps I should ask, what should students say when they're told that the IDF is equivalent to Hamas?
So a lot of students ask me, what do I say when people tell me that the IDF is actually the IOF, which is the Israel Occupation Forces, or that Israel is really the equivalent, the IDF is really equivalent to Hamas? I mean, this couldn't be further from the truth. When I teach my students, something we may agree with or disagree is, it's a lie. So label it as such. It's just a lie, okay? Last time when I did this Zoom with Ramaz alumni community, we spoke about the roots of Hamas. The roots of Hamas are born in 1987 from the Muslim Brotherhood. It is a terrorist organization, according to the United States, according to European countries. They target civilians. So IDF do not target civilians. That's a lie. In fact, we know that the IDF in advance warned civilians in Gaza to get out of the way. They drop leaflets. They call them ahead of time. They do not. We know that even the latest bombing of the hospital actually happened from Islamic Jihad. But right away, everybody went and said it was Israel. There is a double standard that is being waged, that is being placed on Israel, unlike any other country. To equate Hamas with Israel, with the IDF, is a lie. And so when I speak to students, I say, don't be afraid to say, that's a lie, because it is. It is a lie meant to malign, demonize the Jewish people. It's just not true. And there's so much evidence. There's evidence of videos. You can see a plethora of these evidence of these videos of IDF soldiers speaking, because they usually send out drones to bomb targets. There's this video that I watched once where the IDF female soldier asked, have the children been evacuated? Are there no children? Can you confirm? Can you confirm? He said, negative. And they didn't drop the bomb. He cannot confirm. That is who the Jewish people are. That is the IDF.
Thank you.
And I think there's just a comment on that. I think there's also a practical manifestation of this equivalency on campus. For example, when pro-Palestinian students will approach Israeli students on campus and say, I won't be in a picture with you, I won't be seen with you because you're Israeli, and that means by definition, you had to serve in the IDF, which all of our Israeli undergraduate students have done. And therefore, you are part of the IDF, and the IDF is an occupational force, and therefore you are an occupier. And I think that's crucial to the conversation and the discourse around proportionality and about the justification of war. Because one of the arguments being leveled against Israel is that all Israeli citizens have required conscription, and therefore they're all soldiers. And so murdering and massacring men and women who served in the IDF is the same thing as murdering enemy combatants, right? So this discussion kind of warps this, the notions of justice and of just wars and unjust wars. And it's very difficult to have a conversation with somebody who says, if you are Israeli, you are automatically part of the IDF, and you are you are an occupier.
You're no longer just a civilian. Is what you're saying. You're no longer, you're an occupier. Well, absolutely. And I just want to say, in New York City, our streets are basically filled with posters of children, women kidnapped. And I couldn't believe my eyes when I walked one day, and instead of kidnapped, they put occupier, occupier, occupier. Every single Jew in Israel is that target, is an occupier.
Given these difficulties, is there any possibility right now to bridge community between Jews and pro-Palestinians or Muslims on campus? Or does it feel like a lost cause?
It's very, very challenging, I think, on both sides and for both communities. I think we would like for there to be some sort of discussion or dialogue between the two communities, but there is a sense of hurt and pain and anger that I think both communities feel, and therefore have been hesitant to try to have those conversations. So I think that's one part of it. I'm part of the Harvard chaplains, and we had a meeting a few weeks ago in which my colleague, who's our campus rabbi, and the Muslim chaplain at Harvard were able to both share their experience of what's been going on campus. And so I think on a leadership level, that's something beautiful, and I think that's something that's unusual to happen right now, to have leaders of Jewish and Islamic faith being able to be in the same space and to talk and to be understanding and curious and empathic with one another. So I think that was really a beautiful moment, and we've continued to share that friendship with other faith leadership on campus. At the same time, I'll share one positive development. One of our students at the college has created a hotline for students to learn more, to ask questions about what's going on in Israel. Students may be embarrassed to not know what's going on and to ask elementary and basic questions about what's happening. And so students created really this network of students, Jewish students, Muslim students, Israeli students, Palestinian students, who are all trained in mediation to be able to speak and to answer questions that other students may have on campus. So I think this is, an important educational initiative that allows students, right, who are kind of in this middle chunk, who aren't part of the Jewish and Israeli community, who aren't part of the Palestinian or Arab community on campus, but who are just the general population who have questions about what's going on campus, why are things so polarized, what's happening in the Middle East. So I think that's a positive development. I will say there have been Jewish students who have tried to have conversations and dialogue with Palestinian students or students who are part of the pro-Palestinian community, and there has been no interest on the other side for these types of conversations. And I think, unfortunately, this seems to be symbolic and more of a microcosm, I think, of many of the communities around the world and around the country where there are, it seems, Jews are willing to have a conversation, even though it's painful to have a conversation. I think about Yossi Klein Halevi, who has passionately spoken and written about how he would love to have an Israel, which is the whole land of Israel, but at the same time recognizes that there are other people and we have to figure out a way to live together. And I think I feel a sense that in the Jewish community, there's somewhat of an openness to that idea. But when you hear chants of from the river to the sea, it doesn't seem like there is another community who is willing to have that conversation. And that's what I've seen on campus, is that there isn't, when you have this colonialist narrative, there's no reason to have a conversation or a dialogue, because why would you have a conversation or a dialogue with those who are oppressing others?
So with that in mind, what is the relationship between decolonialist studies, ethnic studies, intersectionality, and other progressive disciplines and the current moment on campus? And this is for either of you. Dr. Lekht, would you like to begin?
Sure. So I come from California, actually, and in California, the battle is really around ethnic studies. So I'm going to discuss that. Ethnic studies is, as it is currently in its iteration, it's called the Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum in the state of California, builds an entire world for students in which, once again, I don't want to be so repetitive, but it's quite simple. It builds a world for students in which we judge the world, we judge state actors based on who is colonial, who is white, who has the hegemony, right? White hegemony, colonial hegemony, right? In that paradigm, Israel and Zionism has found itself on the side of colonialists. And in that curriculum, Israel is deemed as a white supremacist state, as a European transplants, Jews who came from Europe and colonized and occupied and took the Palestinian indigenous land. It's taken this, it's a lie, it's taken this lie, but has basically sanctioned it under the social justice language of the political left, which once again, and I'm saying it again, sees that world through that. It's a very simplistic lens. Who has the power? And like I said before, if an alien descended from outer space and took a look without any context at the conflict, at Israel and its neighbors, especially the Palestinian Arabs, this alien would come away thinking, well, who holds power? Israel. Israel has a military. Israel has political sovereignty. Israel is economically strong. Palestinians are stateless. And in that paradigm, Israel comes off as colonial. And this is ethnic studies. It goes one step further, by the way, the model curriculum in California, there's a toolkit for Palestine. And in that toolkit for Palestine, there's a whole lesson developed and devoted on Zionism, on how Zionism is a form of white supremacy. This is what is happening in schools, in high schools in the state of California. And once again, it's coming from that the Soviet Union shipped the anti-Zionist propaganda together with this framework that's dominating universities, that's dominating ethnic studies, anthropology, sociology, literature. When I was in graduate school studying Anna Karenina, for instance, we did a post-colonial analysis of Anna Karenina, which is completely bizarre. But it's dominating the academia in most humanities. And it's a big problem. And for me, one of the things when I speak on anti-Semitism, I think personally that we should not be fighting perhaps even the anti-Semitism as much as this framework that breeds and primes people to take the helm of BDS, be at the helm of BDS, to be at the helm of anti-Israel agitation and anti-Israel movements. That is the problem. That the anti-Semitism is the manifestation of the deeper problem, which is this Soviet narrative that we're seeing played out right now.
Yeah, and I'll say that what people are seeing, what college students are seeing, college students are these aliens who have no familiarity with the Middle East and with the conflict, and they see social media posts about Israel, and they see proportionality, and they see that Israel is decimating Gaza, and so they naturally assume Israel is the bad person. Israel has a lot more power, a lot more resources, has the military advantage. So they must be in the wrong here. So you have students who are not so who aren't trying very hard to learn about what's going on, and I don't entirely blame them. This is just what they see, and if this is what you consume, you're of course going to arrive at the conclusion that Israel is in the wrong here. But this has serious consequences for the way that students become sympathetic to the pro-Palestinian or pro-Hamas side of what's going on campus. So I think that's one part that's really what's practically happening. But I also think there's another part that these types of thinkings, this is a binary mode of thinking of oppressor and oppressed. And universities used to celebrate teaching a multitude of approaches and modes of thinking. And there's been a shift to thinking in binaries as opposed to being able to think in different ways. And I think that's one of the reasons why this has become so challenging, because there has been a de-emphasis on trying to explore the world in different ways.
I think a question on a lot of people's minds this evening and in general is given these entrenched ideologies, can modern Orthodox Jews continue to attend elite secular universities?
Yeah,
What are
I
your
think it's a
thoughts?
big, yeah, it's a big challenge. There was a top-ranking United States government official who visited Hillel a couple of weeks ago to meet with our staff, and he shared with me, he's not Jewish, but he shared with me that when he was at Harvard, he had an Orthodox friend who was a close friend of his, and that friend would bring him to Hillel. And that relationship that he had with this friend 30 years ago as a college student is what made him so understanding and sympathetic and compassionate toward the Jewish people in Israel right now. And to have somebody who is a high-ranking official in the United States government who was able to arrive at that perspective, directly as a result of a relationship with somebody who's an Orthodox Jew, I think is really important and is really significant. And we have to recognize that the future leaders of our country come from these elite universities, and that the way that we can influence other people, and conversely, the way that we can be influenced by them, has a lot of value both for us internally and who we can become as people, but also in advancing and advocating for the Jewish people in Israel on the world stage. So I think it's important that we have students who are at these universities. So I think that's one. The second point, which I think several students have shared with me, is that when the Jews are gone and we vacate the premises, there's nobody to stand up for Jews and stand up against anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, would we rather have spaces and institutions in which Israel can be decried and that can be demonized and criticized with no advocate and with no one to defend it, or would we rather have institutions in which we have a voice and we have a say and we can stand up for the Jewish people and for the state of Israel? So I think those are important. Those are important angles to think about. What are the risks and what are the opportunities of having our students attend elite universities?
Dr. Lekht, was there anything you wanted to add to that before we go on?
I am conflicted. I think it's a difficult question. I think that when I think of Jews and Jewish history, I pride myself on the fact that I believe that we're a people, a warrior people, a people that don't succumb to a victim narrative, that we overcome. And I think that not sending our kids to universities out of fear is not the right way. I think we should be strong. We should educate ourselves. In the beginning, Kenny said, we have to arm ourselves in this narrative war, in this proxy war, with knowledge, with understanding. How do we articulate that Hamas is not IDF, that every single civilian in Israel is not an occupier? This narrative about Israel and Zionists as occupiers has been playing out for the last 20 years. And I think we're now just really taking stock of it. I don't think that we should be not sending our kids. I think we should be sending them, but we should be sending them with rich, robust knowledge to be able to articulate strongly their positions.
Thank you. I should mention there was a question in the chat about whether this Zoom this evening can be disseminated. It is being recorded and it will be available. So for those of you who want to show it to your children, students, it certainly will be available.
I just want to add one thought about what Dr. Lekht said. I think there's important education that we must have for our high school students before we send them off to university campuses. But what I've seen in my time here is very, very thoughtful, smart, well-armed with facts students who are trying to have conversations and dialogues with peers, whether it's directly with peers, sometimes it's with clubs, with publications, in which they know how to defend Israel. They know what's true and what's untrue, and there is resistance, and it's hard to make headway in some of these conversations. And so, while I think it's important that we educate our students before they arrive on campus, I think there are real challenges and there is real resistance even when students arrive here. And the role of education is certainly worthwhile and important, but there's also another component that even with the most with our most thoughtful students who we have and who have gained from our schools, it's still hard to have these conversations.
We have another question coming in about the United Nations, and specifically when people use UN statements against Israel to say the world believes we're wrong, what is the best answer to that? How do you respond to that? Dr. Lekht.
Yes, I would just like to say, give a footnote of history about the United Nations. Once again, United Nations passed a resolution that Zionism is racism in the 1970s. I don't recall exactly the date at the moment, perhaps it's 76. Now it has rescinded that resolution, but it had put out a resolution that Zionism is racism. And if you've learned anything with me tonight, the machinations of that term, that language come from the Soviet Union. That slogan was used for Jews in order to delegitimize and demonize Jews. You see, once again, I just want to underscore something for the audience tonight. Because anti-Semitism is a very sophisticated virus, a very sophisticated hatred, it evolves. And so the language of the anti-Semite will evolve as well. Stalin didn't say Jew, or he didn't rarely even use the derogatory word, which was kaik. He said rootless cosmopolitan. He put Slansky, who was a Jewish Czech communist, basically, on trial and executed him for the crime of Zionism. Why was it a crime? Because Zionism at its core is Jewish nationalism. And that was an anathema to the Soviet ideology about the fact that in the Soviet Union and communism, we must unite around a shared goal, right? Intersectionality, if you will, around a shared goal. And that is that we international workers unite. Not Jews and Zionists and Armenians unite, international workers unite. And so Stalin and the Soviet Union and the KGB operatives understood very well that when they put out the slogan, Zionism is racism, and every single Jew in the Soviet Union understood that that meant that they are racists, that they are Jews, because they understood in the Soviet Union that if you say Zionist, it's a euphemism for Jew. So I just wanted to give that footnote. And we're living in this era. My mother came to spoke to my seniors today at Ramaz as I'm teaching a class on propaganda and literature. And I wanted her to speak about her experiences as a Jew growing up in the Soviet Union. And she was at a loss of words and said, I can't believe that I've left the Soviet Union because of the anti-Zionism, and I'm seeing the same language here again. And it's harrowing. So I'm just going to give that background.
Thank you. Another question for you, Dr. Lekht. It's a common theme in a few of them, actually, but essentially, what is the best way to respond to the occupier claim against Israel?
Listen, the Jewish people come from the land of Israel. The Jewish people are the indigenous people. We know this from religious texts. We know this from historical texts. We have done a bad job marketing, if you will, telling our story. I went to a Jewish day school in Los Angeles. What I was taught was we begin the story in 48. Well, if we begin the story in 48, we lost. If you begin the story of in 1948, you can easily see how you can be pitted as a colonizer. We have to reclaim telling the story of the Jews. We are not occupiers. We are really the indigenous people of the land of Israel. Now, we were kicked out and we're in the diaspora for 2,000 years. We of course still had a presence in the land, not as sovereigns. But the return of the Jewish people is the return to their homeland. And it's an absolute, again, it's a lie, and a very sophisticated lie. But we need to be able to arm ourselves with, I believe that knowledge is very crucial here, to know where does the term Palestine come from, to know when the Palestinian movement in 1964 under Yasser Arafat, the PLO, became a national movement, to understand when did the term Palestine evolve to mean Muslim or Arab majority, because for thousands of years, Palestine meant Jewish. I mean, my mother was told, go back to Palestine. Why would a non-Jewish person tell my mother to go back to Palestine, because for the non-Jew, Palestine always signified Jewish land. So we have a lot of undoing to do, a lot of educating to do, but it's just a lie. We're not occupiers.
Thank you. We have a question here. How is the community handling Jews who are pro-Palestinian? And Rabbi Noah, you can talk about that on campus, and then Dr. Lekht, you can talk about it in general.
I think this is something fascinating. I think I've been supporting students across all of Harvard, not just undergraduates who are my primary constituents here, but also graduate students. And I've spoken to many graduate students who themselves are more progressive in their politics in general and with regard to Israel in specific. And some of them have, the word pro-Palestinian itself is complex and means different things to different people. Sometimes we can be referring to people who who believe in or support Hamas. Sometimes people who believe in the people of Palestine or areas called Palestine. But I think there are Jews who have progressive beliefs who have viewed themselves in some way as pro-Palestinian, being really confused and betrayed when right after October 7th, their progressive friends and who they thought were allies were coming out with statements condemning Israel and saying that the massacre was Israel's own fault and responsibility. And so I think there has been a sense of betrayal for many progressive Jews who felt that it was so clearly that October 7th was a horrible, unjustified massacre. But hearing other progressives who don't agree with that. So I think that's one group, and then I think there's another group of Jews who don't see it that way at all. For example, at the Harvard Divinity School, there are a lot of Jews who identify as pro-Palestinian, have condemned Israel and condemned Israel for being responsible for October 7th, who are calling for a ceasefire. And it seems that there's some sort of splitting going on between people identifying as connected to the Jewish people versus people who are moving more toward the Palestinian camp. So we're seeing, I think, there are people who are divided and are confused, and they feel connected to the Jewish people and they feel betrayed. And there are people who it seems have completely left the bandwagon and do not feel sympathetic to the Jewish people, which I think is incredibly sad and challenging.
Thank you. We have a question here. How should we respond when people suggest that an Israeli policy of West Bank settlement expansion will, in the long run, inexorably lead either to ethnic cleansing or to an apartheid state? To what extent, if at all, should such policies be seen as undermining Israel's moral standing? Dr. Lekht?
Sure. I just want to point out for everyone tonight that when the Hamas operatives went on October 7th, they didn't go to a settlement. They went to Israel 67 borders. They went into sovereign Israel. So this idea that the quote unquote settlements are an obstacle in their expansion, is an obstacle to peace, is another statement we must contend with. This right now, I'm going to say, does require quite a bit of knowledge. Now, in terms of international law, what does international law say about settlements in Judea-Samaria, i.e. West Bank? It's not clear, because it's not clear where you start the history. If you start the history in 1920, when the League of Nations met at San Remo. Now, they met at San Remo in 1920 to discuss the reconstitution of a Jewish national homeland in the British Mandate for Palestine. That was earmarked for the Jewish people. So if you start your story there, then Judea-Samaria, according to that document, the mandate for the British Mandate of Palestine document that was ratified at San Remo, would state that Jewish villages, Jewish quote-unquote settlements, are completely legal. However, if you look at the Fourth Geneva Convention international law documents, in the fact that Israel, after 67 war, decided to institute a military occupation in Judea Samaria. According to the Geneva Convention, when a country institutes a military occupation, they cannot have civilian population. They cannot build civilian villages. But here's another wrinkle in all of this that many people don't know regarding areas A, B, and C. Areas A in Judea Samaria, i.e. West Bank, is fully controlled by Arabs. Area B is controlled together with the Palestinian Authority and Israel. And Area C is Israel. And there are hundreds of Arab villages being built in Area C illegally. But nobody discusses whether those villages are an obstacle to peace in the Middle East. Somehow, once again, it's the Jewish villages, Israeli villages, settlements. So that's my answer to that question.
Thank you. If there's one recurring theme this evening, I think it's that we all need to arm ourselves with knowledge, and you have both done such a wonderful job in helping us to do that. We thank you both. There are more questions than we have time to answer, but I am being told it is time to wrap up. So I'm going to turn things back over to Kenny. But thank you once again, Dr. Lekht and Rev Noah.
Well, I want to thank all of you. As I started this evening, knowledge is power, and as Dr. Lekht picked up on, that is really, for all of us, the most essential part of arming ourselves, literally and figuratively. And so having the three of you this evening has really helped all of us on tonight's Zoom. We will continue these opportunities. And of course, as was said, we will be sending this out as we've sent out all of our recordings to review and to understand and to ask more questions. We will send Dr. Lekht and Rabbi Marlowe's contact information out when we send these Zooms out. So if you have questions, I'm sure that they will be happy to answer them. And we will look forward to having everyone join us at the rally next Tuesday, November the 14th in Washington, D.C. Please, we need to be there, strong in numbers and strong in the way that we show up. Bring your children, your grandchildren, your friends. Let's be there in the numbers that we should. To end this evening, we're going to ask Rabbi Marlowe to lead us in Tehillim. Rabbi Marlowe.
Shir hamalot mimamakim kraticha Adonai. Adonai shema v'koli tiena oznecha kashuvot lekol tachanunai. Im avonot tishmoria Adonai mi yamod. Ki imcha salicha leman tivarei. Kiviti Adonai kivita nafshi v'lidivaro ochalti. Nafshi l'Adonai m'shomerim lavoker shomerim lavoker. Yachel Yisrael Adonai Kim Adonai HaChesed v'ribei mofedut. V'hu yiftet Yisrael Mikol avonotav.
Amen. Thank you all. Thank you. And wishing everyone a good night. And we look forward to being back in touch with you shortly. Take care.